My father laughed into the phone. "I don't claim other people's kids," he said. "Stop sending me their little projects. They're not mine. Never were. 14 cards, 3 years. Everyone returned unopened." The last envelope had his handwriting across the front. "No such grandchildren." My 8-year-old had sprayed her mother's perfume on that card so he would know it came from home. My 11-year-old had written every letter by hand because someone once told him neat writing shows respect. My father read none of it. He just sent them back and laughed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. I placed the entire stack beside my grandmother's plate at Sunday lunch and waited. She opened 2 cards. Then she looked at my father the way you look at a stranger who has been sitting in your house for years. "Stay until 3, she said. "The whole family needs to hear this." He smiled, certain the hour still belonged to him. It didn't. My name is Julie Thomas, 43 years old. If a relative ever returned your child's love like unwanted mail, this story is for you. Drop a comment and subscribe because by 3:00 that table would no longer be his. But that phone call was the end of something, not the beginning. To understand what my grandmother did that afternoon, you have to start 6 weeks earlier on an ordinary Friday in March with an 8-year-old in a mailbox. Clara checks the mail on Fridays. Nobody assigned her that job. She took it the way children take things, quietly and completely, and by the 3rd year it belonged to her, the way the bees belonged to her brother. That Friday, she came up the driveway walking slower than usual. She had one envelope, pink, her own handwriting on the front, the letters leaning left the way they do when she is trying very hard. She held it out to me and didn't say anything. I knew before I read it. There is a particular way a returned envelope feels in your hand, too light for how much went into it. Across the front in blue ballpoint in the careful slanted print my father learned as a boy. "No such grandchildren." I turned it over. The seal was still down. 5 weeks in the world and nobody had opened it. "Go wash up for dinner," I said. She looked at the envelope in my hand, then at my face, and made a decision I could see her make. She went inside. I stood in the driveway a moment longer. When I lifted the envelope closer, I could still smell my perfume on the paper. Faint, 5 weeks, and it hadn't given up. That night after the dishes, I got the shoe box down from the top of my closet. There were 13 envelopes in it. I laid them out across the bed in the order they were mailed, and I got my notebook because that is what I do. I am a home health aide. I spend my days charting other people's blood pressure and medication times and whether they ate. Numbers on a page keep a person honest. They keep me honest. Valentine's Day 2023, Easter, Father's Day, his birthday in August, Grandparents' Day in September, Thanksgiving, Christmas. Then the next year all over again. Every envelope had come back with the same 2 words written on it: return to sender. But looking at them all at once in the lamplight on a bed instead of one at a time in a mailbox, something bothered me and I couldn't say what. I sat there for a long while with 14 envelopes and a feeling I had no name for. I wrote the last line in the notebook. Card 14, mailed February 10th, returned March 20th, seal intact, 5 weeks, 5 weeks. That was the part I kept looking at. 5 weeks is not a reflex. 5 weeks is a decision made slowly in a quiet house by a man who had time to think about it. The line under it stayed blank. I picked up my phone. I called him Saturday morning. He answered on the 4th ring, and behind his voice I could hear the cattle auction on the radio, that flat, fast chant that has been the soundtrack of my entire childhood. I asked him one question. I asked if he had written on my daughter's envelope. He laughed before he answered. That was the part I keep, not the sentence. The laugh came first, easy and unbothered. The laugh of a man being asked about something that had never cost him a single night of sleep. "I don't claim other people's kids," he said. "Stop sending me their little projects." Little projects. He knew what was inside them then well enough to have an opinion. "Okay," I said. "Julie." "Okay, Dad." I hung up. My hands were steady. That surprised me a little. Then I went to the kitchen calendar and circled the 2nd Sunday in April because the family still eats lunch together at his house every week, and because there was one person who would be sitting at that table who had not earned any of this. I put the shoe box on the counter where I could see it. If you're wondering why I was still driving 20 minutes to that house at all after 3 years, that's fair. I've asked myself the same thing. The answer starts in a truck cab outside a sale barn in Claremore 15 years ago. I was 28. I was driving my father to a follow-up appointment because my mother asked me to, and because he wouldn't go otherwise. He left his phone on the bench seat when he went in to settle up with the auction office. It lit up. I wasn't looking for it. It lit up twice more while I sat there with the window down. And the second time I read it and the third time I understood. Same room as last month. There was a woman who kept the books at the sale barn. I had met her at a church supper. She had brought a pecan pie and complimented my mother's hair. I put my hand flat over the screen. I don't know why. There was nobody in that truck but me. He came back and we drove to the clinic, and I said nothing for 22 miles because I was not deciding whether to speak. I was deciding where. A week later, I asked him to drive me out to look at a piece of fence, which was a lie. And we sat in that same truck cab with the keys hanging in the ignition and the engine off. I told him to end it. He said I didn't understand men his age. He said, "Your mother and I have an arrangement. You're too young to see." "End it," I said, "or I hand Mom your phone myself." He looked out the windshield for a long time. Then he nodded. And here is the thing I did not understand until this year. He nodded and then he turned and looked at me, and there was nothing grateful in it. Nothing ashamed either. He looked at me the way a man looks at somebody holding a note he intends to pay someday. I was 28. I thought I had saved my parents' marriage. I thought I had done the hard, quiet, adult thing. I told no one, not my sister, not my mother, especially not my mother. That was my mistake, and it took me 15 years and 2 children to see it. 6 years later, my mother got sick. Ovarian cancer found late, which is how it is usually found. I rearranged my shifts. I took the Tuesday and Thursday infusions. My father had a sale every Tuesday and Thursday apparently for 8 months. He would call the hospital from the parking lot of the auction house and ask her how she was doing, and she would say, "Fine, honey," and hang up and look out the window. We never talked about the truck, not once. But there were afternoons in that infusion chair when she would hold my hand longer than the situation called for and squeeze it once hard before she let go. "You drive just like your grandmother," she told me once, both hands all the way there. I was also that year sitting in a folding chair every other Tuesday night in a county building, taking classes to become a licensed foster parent. I had started in January before we knew anything. I was single. I was 34. I had spent 11 years bathing and feeding and turning other people's parents, and I had begun to understand something about who gets shown up for and who doesn't. My mother was the only person in that family who asked me about it. She wanted to know how many classes were left. She wanted to know if the house had to have a fence. I told my father and my sister at Sunday lunch in November. My father set down his knife and his fork one at a time, and he said it to the whole table. No stranger's child is sitting at this table. Nobody argued with him. That's the part people never believe. 11 people at that table, and not one of them said a word. And the ham went around, and Tammy asked Grant to pass the rolls. My mother in her headscarf put her hand on my knee under the tablecloth and left it there. She didn't speak. That was her whole life in one gesture, keeping the peace by holding on to somebody under a table where nobody could see it. 2 months later, she did the exact opposite of that, and none of us knew for 8 years. She died in March. Hospice at the end in a room with a window that looked at a parking lot. The week before, I went down the hall for ice water and came back to find my grandmother stepping out of my mother's room with a cedar box held against her chest with both arms. The way you carry something you have promised not to set down. We looked at each other. I didn't ask. She didn't offer. "Your mother rests easier now," she said. "That's all you need to know today." The box was about the size of a bread loaf. One corner of the lid was worn smooth and pale, the way wood gets when a hand goes over it again and again for years. At the funeral, my father stood in the doorway of the church and received condolences like a man hosting an event. 200 people told him he was strong. I took one thing home from my mother's dresser, a bottle of white linen half gone. She had worn it since before I was born. I still wear it. It is the only inheritance I ever wanted and the only one anybody offered. I thought I had buried the one person who was grateful for my silence. I had it backwards. My mother had never been silent. She had only set a timer. Cole came into my life sideways, the way good things do. He was rewiring a bathroom for one of my clients, a 91-year-old man named Wendell, who liked to talk. And I came in on a Wednesday to find the two of them arguing about a football game from 1978. We married in October of 2018 in a courthouse with Wendell's daughter as a witness because Wendell insisted. My father came late and left early and did not stay for cake. Clee watched my family for exactly one Sunday before he had them figured out. "Your family has a seating chart for love, Julie," he said in the truck on the way home, "and you keep waiting on a better chair." I told him that was a cruel thing to say about people he'd just met. He said, "I didn't say it about them. I said it about you." Snorts, our first table together, came from a swap meet, $40, $1 leg shorter than the others. Cole shimmed it with a piece of cedar shingle and stood back. Table doesn't have to be pretty, he said. It has to be steady. The call came 13 months after the wedding. A boy, 5 years old, needed a place that night. They said temporary, the way they always say it because they have to. Levi came through our door in November of 2019 with a plastic grocery sack and a coat 2 sizes too big. For the first 3 months, he only sat in one chair in our house, the one at the end of the kitchen table, back to the wall facing the front door. If you moved him, he moved back. If you sat there first, he stood until you got up. He was not afraid of us. He was keeping track of the exits. There is a difference, and it takes a while to learn it. He didn't cry that first winter. He asked questions, short ones with no warm-up, usually in the car. Do you get money for me? What happens if I break something big? How many kids did you have before? We answered everyone straight. Miss Annette, the therapist we found through the agency, told us that was the whole job for the first year. Don't decorate the truth. Just hand it over. The adoption finalized in September of 2020. In the courtroom, the judge asked Levi if he understood what was happening. And Levi, 6 years old in a clip-on tie, looked up at her and said, "Is it permanent, or the other kind?" She took a second before she answered him. I've thought about that second a lot. Afterward, he asked if he could keep his copy of the paper in his room, not with the important documents in his room where he could get to it. 3 weeks before that hearing, I called my father and invited him. I told him it was a Tuesday morning. I told him it would take 20 minutes, and that afterward the judge lets the children come around the bench for a photograph, because she likes doing it, and the court staff bring a cake from the grocery store. He said he'd have to see about the sale. He did not come. Tammy came. She came by herself, and she cried in the hallway outside the courtroom, and she gave Levi a card with $10 folded inside it. I have never been able to hold anything against her cleanly, and that morning is why. That night, Levi stood in my bedroom doorway and pointed at the photograph on my dresser and asked who the man was. "That's my dad," I said. "Is he going to be my grandpa? He is your grandpa." That part already happened. He thought about it the way he thinks about everything, slowly from the back of the room, checking it for exits. "Okay," he said, "but is he going to do it?" I told him I didn't know. That was the first honest thing I ever said to my son about my father, and it came about 2 years too early for either of us. Clara came in March of 2021, 3 years old, a talker, a hugger of strangers, the opposite of her brother in every way that a child can be the opposite of another. She had no exits to count. She arrived assuming she was all ready, and by the time we finalized in May of 2022, she had rearranged the entire house around herself. At 6, she started what she calls her birthday book, a yellow spiral notebook. Everybody who belongs to her gets a page. Cole, me, Levi, Miss Annette, Wendell until he passed, her second grade teacher. And that same year, Levi came home from school and told us with total seriousness that Mrs. Pewitt had explained something about handwriting. "Neat writing is how you show respect to the person reading it," he said. "So they know you spent the time. He has written that way ever since." Slowly, every letter separate. It takes him an hour to do a card that would take Clara 4 minutes. That Christmas, we were invited to Sapulpa for lunch, all 4 of us. I bought the kids new shirts. When we got there, my father had set up a card table in the hallway past the coat rack with 2 paper plates on it. "They'll be more comfortable out there," he said. Pleasant as anything. Family tables tight this year. There were 2 empty chairs at the family table. I counted them from where I stood. Clara was 4. She thought the little table was a treat. Levi was 8. He looked at the card table and then at the doorway and then at me, and he did not say one word the whole way home. That was the last time either of my children set foot in that house for 3 years. In January in Miss Annette's office, she said something I have turned over 1,000 times since. She said, "Children in adoptive families sometimes need to knock on the extended family's door themselves, not through me, in their own hand, on their own paper. It gives them a say in something that has always been decided for them." Clara opened the birthday book to a page she had filled out from a family calendar. Grandpa Merle, August 9th, and underneath in her handwriting, "What cake?" Valentine's Day was 3 weeks out. The first card came back in early March of 2023. Return to sender. Green ink, round letters written by someone who dots the I with a small circle. I told myself the post office had merged the rural cluster boxes out on his road, which was true, and that the route was confused, which was possible. Easter came back. Father's Day came back. His birthday, Grandparents' Day, which Clara had insisted on because the pharmacy had a whole display for it. 7 cards in 2023, all returned. Same green ink. Cole picked one up off the counter one night, turned it toward the light, and started to say something. "It's the route change," I said. "Nobody sends back a kid's Easter card on purpose." He put it down and let me have that. He let me have it for a long time, actually, which I've since decided was love and not cowardice, though I've gone back and forth. Easter of 2024 was the last time I let myself hope. After the service out on the church steps, my grandmother took Clara's hand in front of everyone and asked if the children wanted to come by her house for pie, just like that in daylight where people could see. Clara talked about it the whole way to the car. Then somebody wanted a family picture on the steps, and my father in his good jacket with a voice like a man being generous waved his hand and said, "Just the grandkids this one. Keep it simple for the frame." I watched my 2 children step backward out of the shot, exactly 1 step. Nobody made them. They knew where the line was because they had been shown it before. That night, Clara mailed her Easter card anyway, and I started keeping the envelopes, not the cards, the envelopes. I couldn't have told you why. I told myself it was because I had a notebook and the notebook had a column for it. In August of 2024, Levi harvested his first honey. 2 hives built with coal in the spring out past the shed. He designed the label himself on a school computer. Levi and Grandpa's honey harvested by hand in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was 10. He had never once been alone in a room with that man. He was still hopping to earn him. The jar was too big to mail with the card, so I drove it over myself on a Saturday and set it on the porch when nobody answered the door. 3 days later, I came home to find it sitting on my own porch in the sun with the bow still on it. There was a note taped to the lid, block capitals, black marker. "Do not send again." That handwriting was not my father's. My father writes in a slanted print he learned in the 50s, and he uses a ballpoint, always blue. Someone else had driven 20 minutes each way to return an $11 jar of honey made by a 10-year-old. And on the label, in one corner, somebody had scraped at Levi's design with a fingernail. Not enough to remove it, just enough to try. If you've ever kept receipts just to prove to yourself you weren't imagining things, tell me about it in the comments. That shoe box was mine for 3 years. Stay with me because what my grandmother noticed on those envelopes was not what I brought them for. That fall, my niece Brooke came over to swim. She's 16. She's the only one of them who ever calls, and she has no ability whatsoever to keep a secret because she doesn't know which things are secrets. She asked me why I never answered about the Thanksgiving schedule in Maine family. I said, "In what?" She got very interested in her phone and turned it face down. "I thought you just left the group." She said, "Dad said you wanted space, Dad." Grant, my sister's husband, who works in insurance claims and has never in his life delivered bad news that could be traced back to him. There was a family group chat. There had been for over a year. I had never been in it, so that was one hand accounted for. The green ink was still a stranger. The Christmas card of 2024 came back in the first week of January. Card 12. Levi took it off the counter and held it. He turned it over. He looked at the seal, still down, and I watched an 11-year-old boy do arithmetic he should never have had to do. Then he handed it back to me and said, "You can't get returned if you don't apply." He hasn't written to my father since. There is a drawer in his room with a stack of blank cards in it. He bought them himself at the drugstore with his own money for 3 holidays he was planning ahead for. They're still in there. I've never moved them. In March of 2025, my father called me for the first time in 11 months. He was pleasant. He asked about the weather in Tulsa. He said the fescue had come in early. Then he told me that your grandmother's got a heart thing at the clinic on the 22nd, and I can't get away, and asked whether I could run her over. I said yes before he finished the sentence. I want to be clear that this was not weakness. She needed a ride, and I am the only one in that family who understands what a cardiologist is actually saying when he starts talking fast about numbers. But there was a half-second right at the end of the call where I heard the whole shape of it. He would not open an envelope from my daughter. He would not stand in a photograph beside my son. He would not drive 20 minutes for a Tuesday morning in a courtroom. And he would still call me on a weekday afternoon and hand me his mother because I was useful. And useful was the only category he had ever been willing to file me under. I drove her. She wore her good coat. Her ejection fraction was down a little, and the doctor changed one of her medications. And I wrote it all in the notebook and read it back to her in the parking lot until she said, "All right, "All right, Julie, I heard you." That evening, I called my father to tell him how it went. He thanked me. He thanked me twice, which for him is a great deal. Then I said, "Did Levi's Christmas card ever turn up?" There was a pause about 2 seconds long. "I'll let you go," he said. "Appreciate you taking her." He hung up on me in the middle of thanking me. I have never heard anything so precisely like him in my life. After that, I stopped telling my children when I had spoken to their grandfather not to protect him, to keep them from doing what I could feel myself doing every single time, leaning in toward the phone, waiting for the part where he asked. Clara kept going. She used Cole's stamps out of the desk. She didn't tell me. I found out in December of 2025 when I saw the roll was short, and by then, card 13 was already gone. And on the 10th of February this year, she came into my bathroom, picked up the white linen off my counter, and sprayed the envelope twice. So, he knows it came from home. She said I should have stopped her. I want that on the record since I'm the one telling this. I stood in my own bathroom and watched my 8-year-old perfume an envelope for a man who had returned 12 of them, and I let her walk it out to the mailbox because I could not stand to be the one who told her number 6 weeks later. It came back. 4 days after the phone call on a Tuesday, I drove out to my grandmother's house the way I do every Tuesday. Dorothy Thomas turned 90 in February. She lives alone in a small house 8 minutes from my father's. She doesn't drive anymore, and she is the only person in that family who has never once made me prove I belong to it. I do her blood pressure. I fill her 7-day pill organizer. It takes 40 minutes and it is the best part of my week. I go on Tuesday mornings while the kids are at school. That detail matters more than it sounds like it should. That morning with the cuff hissing on her arm, she said, "Tammy tells me you've all been too busy to write, even the children." She watched the dial. "Children are never that busy, Julie." I felt the floor tilt. She didn't know. For 3 years, my grandmother had been sitting in that little house, believing that her great-grandchildren had lost interest in her, and somebody had been keeping her in that belief on purpose. I opened my mouth to tell her everything. And then I looked at her hands, 90 years old, shaking slightly the way they do now, and at the pill organizer with the little cardiac tablets in the Wednesday slot. And I did what I have always done. I said, "It's been a busy stretch, Grandma." I protected her. That is the sentence I would spend the next 3 weeks learning the true cost of. I protected her the way my mother protected all of us. And I did not once consider what it cost the people I was protecting. Before I left, she asked me for something. She almost never asks for anything. My birthday came and went, she said. Nobody brought those bobbies to see me. I'd like to see them. I said I'd bring them Sunday. Cole was against it. We had it out in the kitchen that night quietly because the kids were up. He wanted me to stop going entirely. No stack, no lunch, no scene. Change the locks on the whole thing and let them wonder. You want to hand him a stage? He said, I want to hand her a chart. I said that's all this is. She's 90. Somebody in that house should have the actual information before I close the door for good. He leaned on the counter and looked at the shoe box sitting between us, and the kids outside with Brooke. They don't go in past the kitchen, and if either one of them wants to leave, we leave. No goodbyes, no explaining. He picked up his keys off the hook, which is how Cole agrees to things. Then we all go. He said, nobody walks into that house by themselves. Saturday night, I sorted the 14 envelopes by mailing date and tied them with kitchen twine, the same knot I use on a discharge bag when I send a patient home with their medications. I wrote the last line in the notebook. 14 sent, 14 returned. Handing off Sunday, 12:30. I thought I was going to my last lunch in that house. I was right about that. I was wrong about whose last lunch it was. We got there at 2012. Levi carried the honey in one jar unlabeled because I had told him he did not have to make a label for anybody ever again. And he had said okay in a voice that meant he was going to think about that for a while. The hallway of my father's house is covered in photographs. Grandchildren, great-grandchildren, school pictures in cheap gold frames. Clara stopped in front of it and counted, which is a thing she does. "Mommy," she whispered, "did they run out of walls?" There were 6 frames and 4 children in them, and there were 2 rectangles on the wallpaper, darker than everything around them, where 2 frames had hung enough to keep the sun off. I looked at those 2 shapes for a long time. Something had been there. Something had been taken down. Grant met me in the kitchen with a crisis management smile and asked how work was. At 12:30 we sat down, 11 of us, my father at the head where he has sat for 50 years. He said the blessing he always says and ended it the way he always ends it. Blood built this table. Amen. At the far end under the window was my mother's chair, still sat with a plate. Nobody has sat in it in 8 years. My father tells people he keeps it out of respect. The kids ate outside on the porch steps with Brooke, which was my rule and which nobody objected to, which told me everything about how much anyone at that table wanted them in it. I waited until the ham had gone around twice. At 10 minutes to 1, I reached into my bag and set the stack down beside my grandmother's plate. 14 envelopes tied with twine. I didn't announce it. I didn't say anything at all. Tammy stopped mid-sentence. My father's fork paused and then kept going, which I noticed. My grandmother wiped her hands on her napkin and untied the twine. She took the top one, pink Clara's Valentine, and she stopped. She lifted the envelope closer to her face. She held it there. Ruthie wore this, she said. The whole table went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with me. Who put Ruthie's perfume on a child's envelope? Her daughter did, I said. She wanted him to know it came from home. My grandmother did not look at me. She opened the card and read it. Happy Valentine's Day, Grandpa. I know your birthday is August 9th. Do you know mine? She set it down. She took the next one. Levis's from Christmas of 2024. Every letter made separately. An hour of an 11-year-old's life on a piece of drugstore card stock. She read that one twice. Then she did something I did not expect. She put the cards down and picked up the envelopes. She began turning them over one at a time, holding each one up toward the window light. It went on long enough that my father cleared his throat. She got to the end of the stack and laid them out in front of her plate in 3 small piles. Who else sent these back? She said. Nobody answered. There are 3 hands on these envelopes, my grandmother said, and I only taught one of them to write. I looked down at the table and saw it for the first time. Laid out in her 3 piles, the thing that had been bothering me on my bed 6 weeks earlier. 9 in green gel ink, round letters, small circle over the I, 2 in black block capitals, 3 in slanted blue ballpoint. Tammy set her glass down harder than she meant to. Grant looked at his watch. My father said, Mama, this is a lot of fuss over some cards. My grandmother put both hands flat on the table. Stay until 3, she said. The whole family needs to hear this. Then she turned to my husband, whom she has met perhaps a dozen times. Young man, I'll need your keys in 15 minutes. My father smiled. I watched him do it. He settled back in his chair like a man who had just been handed 2 free hours to sort out a misunderstanding. Cole was gone 25 minutes. He told me the rest of it that night in our kitchen after the kids were down. And I'm giving it to you the way he gave it to me because I wasn't there. He drove her to her house. She asked him to wait in the truck. She was inside a good while, long enough that he got out and stood by the door in case she'd fallen. She came out with a cedar box about the size of a bread loaf held against her chest with both arms. She held that box like a communion tray. Cole said both hands all the way back, never said one word. When they got to the house, she did not come to the table. She walked down the hall to the back bedroom, the one that was my father's when he was a boy, and she closed the door, and that door stayed closed for an hour and a half. At about 20 to 2, Tammy pulled me into the kitchen. My sister is 39. She lives across the section line from our father and takes him a grocery basket every week. She has spent her entire adult life being the one who stayed close, and she has never understood why that didn't earn her anything. Why would you do this to Dad? She said her voice had a crack in it already in front of Mama on a Sunday. He said if the mail just stopped, the whole thing would blow over. I let that sentence sit there between us. He said, I repeated. She heard it a half second after I did. Her face changed. And over her shoulder on the counter was the basket she brings him every week with the mail and the pharmacy bag and a pen cup. And in the pen cup was a green gel pen with the cap chewed flat. On top of the refrigerator next to the calendar was a black marker, 2 ordinary pens in an ordinary kitchen, 11 envelopes between them. Tammy, I said, how many did you write? She didn't answer me. She went back out to the dining room. At 20 to 3, my father came and found me on the porch. He didn't ask me anything. That's what I want you to understand about him. He has never in his life asked me a question he didn't already have an answer for. He stood on the same board he stood on at my mother's funeral, receiving people. When Mama's finished with her sentiments, he said, this card business ends today, and you'll apologize in front of everybody for the stunt. Out in the yard, Brooke was teaching Clara to pitch horseshoes. Levi was sitting on the tailgate of Cole's truck where he could see the front door. All right, I said. He nodded, satisfied, and went back inside. I have thought since that he must have believed he'd won something in that exchange. He had no idea he was standing in the last hour of it. I went out to the truck. Levi was sitting on the open tailgate with the honey jar beside him. He had carried it into that house and then carried it back out again at some point. And I hadn't seen him do that either. I sat down next to him. The metal was hot through my dress. Brooke says Grandma Dot is doing something. He said she is. Is it about the cards? Some of it. He turned the jar a quarter turn on the tailgate, then another quarter turn. I don't want him to say sorry, he said. I asked him what he did want. I have learned to ask that boy instead of guessing because guessing with him is how you end up 2 years behind. He took a long time. I want somebody to say out loud that we tried, he said, because Clara thinks she did it wrong. She thinks she wrote the address wrong on the first one and then kept doing it. I sat there on the tailgate of my husband's truck in my father's driveway and understood that I had missed something enormous. 8 months of Fridays. My 8-year-old had a theory. That is what those 3 years actually cost. And it was never the cards. And it was never even him. It was that when you give a child silence instead of a reason, she will build the reason herself and it will always, always be made out of her. Okay, I said. Down the hall inside the house, the bedroom door was still shut. At 3 minutes to 3, the bedroom door opened. My grandmother came down the hall with the cedar box. Her eyes were red. She had been in there a long time by herself, and she had not been resting. She walked past the empty chair beside my father at the head of the table where she has always sat, and she sat down at the far end under the window in my mother's chair. 11 people watched a 90-year-old woman do that, and not one of us breathed. She set the box in front of her. Bring the children in, she said. They're the reason we're here. The clock on the mantel, my grandfather's clock, which has been in that room since before my father was born, struck 3. She put her hand flat on the lid. I was setting this table before any of you could reach it, she said. You'll give me 1 hour of truth for 50 years of Sundays. My father said, Mama Merle. That was all, one word. And my father, 70 years old, the head of that table, stopped talking. She opened the box. On top was an envelope yellowed along one edge with a ring stain on the corner where a teacup had sat on it, and on the front of it was my mother's handwriting. I put my hand on the table. My grandmother read what was written on the front out loud. Dot. If Merle ever makes Julie choose between him and the children she is waiting for, read this to all of them at once. You'll know when. Then she looked up. Your mother gave me this in January of 2018. She said to me, 2 months before she died, I promised her I wouldn't open it, and I didn't. 8 years I've had it on my dresser. She paused. I prayed I'd die without knowing what was in it. She turned to the rest of the table. An hour ago, I read it for the first time alone back there in that bedroom. Her voice did not change, so you all understand. I could have put it back in the box. I sat with it a good while and thought about doing exactly that. She took out 3 pages of lined paper. I decided against it. I want to be careful here because this is my mother's letter, and it isn't mine to perform. She read it plainly. The way you read a recipe or a bill. That was the thing that undid me. There was no drama in her voice at all. My mother wrote that she had known since 2011. She wrote that she knew who ended it and what it cost her, and that she had never once said thank you because she was too ashamed of the arrangement they had all agreed to live inside. She wrote about a Sunday in November of 2017 when her husband put down his knife and fork and told their daughter that no stranger's child was going to sit at his table. He meant it. She wrote, He snorts will punish Julie for making him behave like a decent man, and he will find a way to do it that nobody will be able to name. It will not look like revenge. It will look like standards. She wrote, Blood didn't sit with me at chemo. Julie did. Merle was at the Claremore sale barn the day they shaved my head. And at the end, she wrote one line directly to me. Julie, don't do what I did. Don't keep it quiet to protect us. The chair legs shrieked on the floor. My father was standing. That letter, he said, is a sick woman's confusion. My grandmother did not raise her voice. She has never had to. She dated it. Merle. She held the envelope up so he could see the front of it. She knew exactly which Sunday this would be. He stood there with his hand on the back of his chair. And then it wasn't me who broke it open. It was Tammy. My sister was looking at the stack of envelopes under her own hand, 9 of them in green ink, and her voice came out small and very young. Dad, she swallowed. What is she talking about? 15 years ago, he looked around that table for somebody. He looked at Grant, and Grant looked at the tablecloth. He looked at my aunt, and she looked at her hands. He looked at Tammy, who had believed him about everything for 39 years, and Tammy was waiting for an answer. That is what did it. Not me, not the letter, not the cards. The people on his own side stopped nodding, and my father could not bear 1 second of it. She should have kept her mouth shut 15 years ago. He shouted like her mother did. The room did not gasp. I want to be honest about that because I've heard people tell stories like this and there's always a gasp. There was nothing. 11 people and my grandfather's clock. He heard it himself. I watched him hear it. His mouth stayed open a second past the end of the sentence, and then he sat down slowly, the way a much older man sits down. Clara was standing just inside the doorway next to her brother where my grandmother had called them in. She said, "So it was never about us." Nobody answered her, so she asked it again the way 8-year-olds do because she genuinely did not know and needed to. It was never about us. My father did not look at her. Then Levi came around the corner of the table. He had the pink envelope in his hand. He'd taken it off the stack at some point, and I hadn't seen him do it. He set it down in front of my father's plate. "Squared it up actually the way he squares up everything. I don't want the cards back," he said. "I just want my sister to stop checking the mailbox." Then he went and stood beside Cole. That's all he said, 22 words. He is 11 and his whole body was shaking and he did not cry. And I have never in my life been prouder of another human being. My grandmother stood up out of my mother's chair. "This is still my table, Merle," she said, "my mother's before that. Your daddy carried it in here the year you were born." She let that sit. "And my table goes where the grandchildren are welcome, all of them." My father said nothing. He got up, walked through the kitchen, and went out the back door toward the old horse barn where there haven't been horses since 2009. He did not slam it. He just left. The head of that table walked out of his own dining room and nobody followed him. And that was the end of 50 years of Sundays. Tammy put her face in her hands. I marked them because he said it would blow over. She said, "I never read one, Julie. I never let myself read one, not even the little ones. I thought if I read them, I'd have to do something." Grant said, "I returned too, that's it, too," like it was a defense. Then he stopped talking and did not say another word that afternoon. I gathered the envelopes off the table and tied the twine around them. 13. I left the pink one where my brother's boy, where my son had put it, squared up in front of an empty plate. On the drive home, Clara fell asleep before we hit the highway. Levi watched the window for a long time and then said without turning around, "Do we ever have to go back there?" "No," I said. "Never." He nodded once and kept watching the fields. That night after they were down, Cole told me about the 25 minutes and about the bedroom door and how she'd asked him to wait in the truck. I got out the notebook. 3 years of columns, dates mailed, dates returned, condition of seal. I wrote one last line, case closed, ongoing care transferred. Then I closed it and put it in the drawer with the manuals and the takeout menus, and I have not opened it since. 3 days later on Tuesday, my grandmother handed me her phone. There was one text on it from my father. 3 words, you chose them. She doesn't type anymore. Her hands won't do it. So she dictated and I typed, sitting on her Davenport with the blood pressure cuff still around her arm. "I chose what your father and I raised you to do. You just never learned it." I read it back to her. She nodded once and told me to shut the phone off and put it in the drawer and asked whether I'd brought the Wednesday pills. The main family group chat went quiet within a week and then dissolved. Brooke told me that. She also told me she'd asked her mother point blank about the green pen and that her mother had cried in the car. My father did not call anyone. Not me, not Tammy, not his mother. At the end of April, a man named Dale Overton called me. He is on the board at my father's church, and he has known this family since before I was born. He was careful in the way people are careful when they have already heard a story and are hopping to be told it isn't true. He asked whether it was correct that I had brought paperwork to family lunch. "No, sir," I said. "I brought my children's mail." He said he wasn't sure he followed. So I told him 14 cards over 3 years. Everyone returned with the seal down. The last one with 3 words written across the front in my father's handwriting and what those 3 words were. I didn't explain what any of it meant. I have learned that if you hand people the plain facts and then stop talking, they do the arithmetic themselves and they will trust their own answer a great deal more than they would ever trust yours. There was a long quiet on the line. 14, he said. 14. And the little girl's was the last one. The little girl's was the last one. He didn't say anything against my father. He didn't say anything for him either. He told me my mother used to make the best pecan bars in the county, and he thanked me for my time and he hung up. Nobody ran my father out of anything. He sits in the same pew. He shakes the same hands after the service, but there is a difference between a man people respect and a man people are careful around. Somewhere in the last 2 weeks of April, my father crossed from the first into the second, and I did not have to lift a finger to move him. On the last Saturday in April, a car I recognized pulled into my driveway. Tammy got out and stood on the walk. She did not come up to the porch. She had something in her hands, 2 school photographs. Levi at 6 in a striped shirt with his hair combed wrong. Clara at 3, laughing with her eyes shut. I had mailed those to my father in 2021. He took them off the wall, Tammy said. I put them up. I did it while he was out, and he took them down that same week and put them in the trash by the burn barrel. She held them out toward the house, not toward me. I fished them out, and then I couldn't put them back on his wall, and I couldn't throw them away either. Her chin went. 5 years, Julie. They've been in my glove box for 5 years. The corners were curled from the heat. I didn't go to the door. I looked at Levi, who was standing at the front window with his hand on the frame, the way he has stood since he was 5 years old, counting the exits. This was his door. I have spent 6 years teaching him it was his door. He looked at me. I nodded. He opened it himself. You can talk to my mom first, he told her. And then he stepped back and led her onto the porch, which I understand better than I can explain here. The terms were mine, and I said them out loud, so all of us heard them the same way. She apologizes to each of my children separately in words they can understand without excuses. She never carries a message from our father to this house again. Not one, not ever. She agreed to both standing on my porch, and she has kept them so far. It has been a few weeks. I'm not making any promises about next year. Grant has not come. I don't expect him to. That's the loss I've stopped trying to fix. Some people never do the hard thing. They just wait to see whether the hard thing was necessary. That night, Clara sat on the edge of her bed with the birthday book open on her knees. Will Grandpa ever know my birthday? There was a version of that answer that would have been kinder for about 4 minutes. He knows it now, baby. I said knowing was never the problem. She thought about that. Then she turned to the last page and asked me how to spell February. On the last Sunday in April, Cole borrowed a neighbor's flatbed and drove to Sulpa with 2 of the men from his shop. My father was not at the house. My grandmother had arranged that, and I have never asked how. They carried out an oak table that has been in that dining room since 1955. It doesn't fit our house. Not properly. You have to turn sideways to get past the end of it. And Cole had to take the door off its hinges to get it in. And it takes up the entire room. We eat at it anyway. On the 3rd of May, we had our first Sunday lunch in Tulsa. We started at 3:00. That was deliberate. 3:00 on Sunday used to mean tea. My mother and my grandmother, 2 cups, 1 hour at the little table in the back. 30 years of it. My father called it the hen hour and made a joke of it every week of my childhood. Now it's when we eat. My grandmother sat at the end near the window with Clara on her right, close enough to reach. We set my mother's photograph on the chair at the far end, propped against the back of it, which was Levi's idea, and which he arranged himself without discussing it with anybody. Tammy came. Brooke came and immediately took over the ice. My grandmother lifted her cup, looked down the length of that scarred oak, and said, "Right on time, Ruthie." Then Levi brought out the honey. He'd made a new label. He didn't ask my permission, and he didn't show it to me first. Levi and Grandma Dot's honey harvested by hand in Tulsa, Oklahoma. My grandmother put her glasses on to read it, and then took them off and didn't say anything at all for a moment, which from her is a great deal. Clara got out the birthday book and wrote a new page in her careful, uneven letters. Grandma Dot, February 12th. And then my grandmother reached into her cardigan pocket and took out an envelope, Clara's name on the front in an old woman's handwriting, which slants and shakes and is beautiful. 14 cards went out of this house over 3 years. That was the first one that ever came in. Clara held it with both hands and looked at it for a long time. "Can I not open it yet?" she said. "I want to put it in the box first." I asked her why. "So the box can learn a new job." She went and got the shoe box down off my closet shelf. She knows exactly where it lives, and she put the envelope inside it alone on the bottom and carried it back to her room. She still checks the mailbox on Fridays. She isn't looking for anything to come back anymore. She's looking for what might have come. Levi is a different repair job entirely. There is one more thing about that drawer in his room. 2 weeks after the lunch, I went in to put away laundry and the stack of blank drugstore cards was gone. I didn't ask. You don't ask that boy things directly. You wait and eventually he tells you sideways. Usually in the truck, usually about 4 minutes from wherever you're going. It took him until the 2nd week of May. I gave them to Miss Annette, he said, for her office for the other kids. I asked if he was sure. "I'm not going to use them," he said, "and they're still good cards." He didn't say it sadly. I want to be accurate about that because it would be easy to make it sad, and it wasn't. He said it the way you'd report that a tool had been moved to a different shelf. He still sits with his back to the wall. He still knows exactly who is in the driveway before the engine shuts off. I don't believe that ever fully leaves a person, and I've stopped treating it as something to be cured. But there are 3 hives out past the shed now instead of 2. And last week, he asked Cole whether they could put a 4th one along the fence line because the clover came in heavy this spring, and he thinks the yard can carry it. That is what recovery looks like on my son. He doesn't talk about it. He makes more room. My father is 70 years old and lives 8 minutes from his mother and 20 minutes from his grandchildren. Nobody took his house. Nobody took his money. He goes to the same church and sits in the same pew and shakes the same hands. What he lost is smaller than any of that, and I think it's worse. He lost the right to say who counts. For 50 years, he decided that at the head of a table, and the table isn't there anymore, and everyone at that lunch heard him explain in his own voice exactly what my children had been punished for. Some Sundays I feel the pull. I catch myself thinking about the phone. 15 years is a long habit, and I don't think it goes away. I think it just gets quieter. Then I look down the table at a woman who is 90, and a boy who counts exits, and a girl who spells February wrong on purpose because she likes the way it looks. Family isn't the people who claim you. It's the people who keep showing up after 3-0-0. If this story found you, share it with somebody who had to build their own table. And tell me in the comments who kept showing up for you after everyone else sent you back. Subscribe if you believe family is something a person chooses. Sunday's coming. Our table has room.